Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin, and we are the Dungeon Dudes.
Welcome to our 2024 class guide for the Ranger in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
The Rangers are the masters of exploration and hunting their prey, and today we're going to take a look at how... The Rangers are both the experts of exploration and hunting their prey, and today we're going to look at how to build a Ranger using the 2024 rules. We're going to look at their class features, their spells, what weapons you might equip, their ability scores, feats, and much more. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
If you've been following our channel for a while, you know that Kelly and I love combining spells and magic items to produce game-changing effects with our character builds, which is why we're really excited about this week's sponsor, Zarnan's Codex of Combined Magic.
This tome brings new player options for combined spells to 5th edition. In addition to new subclasses and feats, there's rules for team-based spells and greater rituals, so characters can cast new spells and old favorites together for greater effect.
We also got a cool preview of some of their linked magic items, which have bonus effects when different party members use them together. There's two magical maces in the book called Daystar and Eventide, which create a magical chain between the two weapons that look like the sun and the moon, and characters can restrain the foes in the gravity chain, or your two characters can hit the maces together, and it produces a supernova that leaves behind a miniature black hole. Some of these are really cool.
We absolutely love it when rules reinforce teamwork and collaboration between the players. It's one of our favorite things to see at the table. Every time that there's a moment at our table where two characters pull off a stunt together, it usually has the whole table cheering. And creating magic items and spells that tie into that theme is just going to be so much fun to see at the table.
So check the links down in the description below. The Kickstarter campaign is closing in just another couple days, so be sure to get in on it before it is too late.
And now, let's get on with the episode.
From the classic archetypes like Legolas and Aragorn to modern reinterpretations like Lara Croft and Katniss Everdeen, the Ranger is a staple of both science fiction and fantasy storytelling, being the long-range combatant, adept at wilderness exploration and survival, handy with both blade and bow, and ready for any sort of situation. They really are one of the most common protagonists across fantasy literature, which is why, especially with their trusty animal companions at their side, they're such a popular character class for new players and veterans.
When you are getting started with a Ranger, there are two main archetypes that you might consider for playing one. The first is the Archer. This iconic playstyle allows you to strike from afar with long-ranged weapons such as bows and crossbows.
And who could ignore the iconic dual wielder in the tradition of Drizzt Do'Urden, fighting with two melee weapons to strike down your foes?
Rangers are heavily based on these iconic fighting styles, and their subclasses allow them to have animal companions or fey magic, and sometimes greater capacity for stealth and exploration. These archetypes are worth considering, though, if this is your first time playing a Ranger.
So let's dive into the core traits for the Ranger class. Their primary abilities are Dexterity and Wisdom, and they've got a D10 hit point die, making them quite robust on the same level as Paladins and fighters.
For saving throw proficiencies, they have Strength and Dexterity. Dexterity is a very useful one. Strength might come up to escape grapples and things of that nature, so could be helpful sometimes. They also get to choose 3 skill proficiencies out of Animal Handling, Athletics, Insight, Investigation, Nature, Perception, Stealth, and Survival.
Rangers get all simple weapons and martial weapons, and they get almost all weapon and armor training. They just do not get heavy armor. But given that they're usually leaning for the dexterity side of things, you're not usually going to be too worried about having the heavy armor anyways. So let us dive right into the Ranger class features. Rangers are a very class feature driven class overall, and they are half casters, and this is their first big feature. Spellcasting. They begin with 2 first-level spell slots and eventually gain 5th level spells, and their spellcasting is based on wisdom.
To calculate your spell saving throw DC, that's going to be 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your wisdom modifier, and your spell attack bonus will be your proficiency bonus plus your wisdom modifier. The Ranger features table, which is on the player's handbook on page 120, shows your spell slots and spells prepared for each level. You're going to regain all of your spell slots on a long rest, and Rangers can change one of their prepared spells after a long rest. Your Ranger subclass may grant you additional spells prepared, which don't count against the number of spells you're allowed to prepare.
So because you only get to change out one of your spells per long rest, it means that you have to be mostly committed to your arsenal of spells. Fortunately, though, there's some really standouts that are widely applicable in many adventuring situations, but you've got a little bit of flexibility to adjust depending on your environment, which is always nice.
Now, also at first level, you're going to gain Favored Enemy. This will allow you to always have Hunter's Mark prepared, and you can cast it twice without expending a spell slot. You regain all expended uses of this ability every time you finish a long rest. So because the Ranger class relies on Hunter's Mark for many of its features, this feature lets it be a class ability twice without you needing to use up a spell slot, but you can also cast Hunter's Mark after that using spell slots.
You get additional uses of this ability as you gain levels in the class, and this means that you've always got Hunter's Mark to fall back on if you're not going to be using one of your other spells. To reiterate what Hunter's Mark does, it's a bonus action spell to cast, which means that you're able to cast it and still attack or do something else on your turn. Hunter's Mark adds an extra d6 of damage to any attack that hits with one of your attacks. And what's cool about Hunter's Mark is that because it's a bonus action to cast and it works melee or ranged, if you have multiple attacks, such as if you are dual wielding or have the extra attack feature because you're a higher level ranger, that extra d6 applies on every single attack that you make. So it can add up to a lot of extra damage, particularly when you are combining it with things with dual wielding and making multiple strikes. And this gives you this sort of bread and butter good damage output as a baseline. There are some other ranger spells that we'll talk about that also require concentration that in some cases may be better for damage at higher levels, but because you've always got a limit on how many spell slots you've got, having this as a backup is always nice, and it's always a good default to know, you can have it there if you need it.
Also at first level, Rangers are going to gain their Weapon Mastery feature. Rangers can use the Mastery property on page 214 of the player's handbook with 2 weapons of their choice. I think depending on which way you're either going to choose both of your melee weapons or you're going to choose a bow and one of your melee weapons.
Now, Rangers can replace both their mastery choices each time they take a long rest, but they don't gain any additional masteries as they gain levels. So it does kind of box you in a little bit. If you are going to favor the ranged style, you can go with one melee weapon and one ranged weapon. Or if you're going to go with the dual wielding style, you might want to choose 2 melee weapons for your masteries. But you can change things up if you find a particularly nice magic weapon that you want to use.
Starting at second level, they're going to gain their fighting style. Rangers can choose a fighting style feat, or they can select Druidic Warrior and learn 2 cantrips of their choice from the Druid spell list.
This can be an interesting way of enabling some alternate builds with the Ranger, particularly if you want to go a more wisdom-based route with your character and take some of the Druid attack spells and use that as your primary method of damage dealing. We'll discuss some of those options a bit later on.
Also at second level, they're going to gain Deft Explorer. You get expertise in one of your skill proficiencies, and you get to learn 2 languages.
For me personally, I think a ranger is best served by getting stealth as their expertise right off the bat. I think stealth is a really core skill for many rangers because you get a lot of benefits from ambushing your enemies. You've got a lot of ways to bolster your stealth, in particular with your spell casting, so you get a lot from having expertise in stealth to start things off.
I also think that depending on the campaign you are in, Rangers also lend themselves really well to being very good at perception and possibly survival. but it depends how often your DM uses it. If you are really playing in a campaign where you have to survive in the wilderness and you are playing a ranger for that purpose, you might consider one of those options.
Investigation can also be another good choice here. Again, I recommend your choice of whether you go with perception, investigation, or survival is going to depend on how your DM likes to run their wilderness exploration. So this is somewhere where I would talk to your DM about which ones to pick. As we'll come to in a moment, you're actually going to get expertise in a couple more skills at higher levels, but that's also where talking to your DM about some campaign expectations is going to help you determine what to focus on. You also get 2 extra languages with this feature. It's cool. Languages have never been a huge feature in any of my campaigns, but
I do think that languages is always a place where you do want to talk to your DM, because I hate picking a language and then it never comes up. So I always ask Monty, what languages might I encounter in this campaign? And he usually gives me 3 or 4 that I might choose from. And then that way I actually feel like I'm getting value out of this. So don't forget to talk to your DM to make sure that you don't pick Abyssal and then never read anything Abyssal in the whole campaign.
Rangers gain ability score improvements at level 4, 8, 12, and 16, and an epic boon feat at level 19. We'll talk about later what you should choose for feats and ability score increases with this feature.
At 5th level, you're going to gain extra attack, so you can attack twice instead of once whenever you take the attack action on your turn. Remember, the same caveats apply here as anybody else who gets extra attack. It does not apply to attacks made using a reaction or bonus action, and instead of attacking with a weapon for each attack, you can make an unarmed strike to grapple or shove a target.
At level 6, you get Roving. This is going to give you a swim speed and a climb speed. It's not spider climbing, so you're not going to climb upside down on ceilings, but it is useful for getting up walls and trees. And your speed increases by 10 feet when you're not wearing heavy armor, which you're not proficient in anyways. So
why are you wearing heavy armor?
Yeah.
Don't do it. At 9th level, you're going to gain expertise, as we said before. So you gain expertise in 2 additional skills. So that same list of skills that we mentioned earlier, you may want to pick 2 additional ones and really round out what your ranger specializes in.
I think that stealth and perception are almost guaranteed.
And then the third one, you could even look at something like acrobatics or athletics here if you want to go that route, or one of the more knowledge-based skills if you want your ranger to be an expert in a certain field of study.
At level 10, you get Tireless. As a magic action, a number of times per day equal to your wisdom modifier. You can just give yourself temporary hit points equal to 1d8 plus wisdom. Don't do this in combat. Do this out of combat. The temporary hit points don't go anywhere. So as long as you got them, it's kind of like just giving yourself extra hit points to be an ablative thing to lose. So between combats, just use this up and you're a little bit tougher, essentially. You also can decrease your exhaustion levels when you take a short rest, which is nice, but because exhaustion is pretty nasty as a status effect as well.
I have the opposite of Tireless. At 13th level, you're going to gain Relentless Hunter. Now, taking damage can't break your concentration on Hunter's Mark.
Cool, I'll take it.
Yeah, this is another feature that ties into Hunter's Mark. Again, we have multiple uses of Hunter's Mark without requiring a spell slot, so consider it one of your main class features.
Nature's Veil comes online at level 14, and this allows you to use a bonus action to gain the invisible condition until the end of your next turn, and you can use this a number of times per day equal to your wisdom modifier, which is a pretty sweet way of just disappearing almost in plain sight.
At 17th level, you're going to gain Precise Hunter. You have advantage on attack rolls against your Hunter's Mark.
At level 18, you get Feral Senses, giving you a 30-foot blind sight.
And at 20th level, you gain Foe Slayer. Your Hunter's Mark damage die increases to 1d10. Keep in mind, again, 1d10, this doesn't sound like the greatest 20th level feature, but if you are dual wielding and making multiple attacks, this can actually add up to quite a bit. So making the most out of this is creating a ranger that can do a lot of attacks.
So with all that in mind, let's look at the ability scores for the ranger. And I think it's pretty clear cut. The ranger is a dexterity-based class. So we're going to drop our 15 and our +2 bonus from our background into our dexterity for sure. Get that up as soon as possible. Get that as high as you can. It's your primary stat for whether you're going melee or ranged. You're either going to be probably using finesse weapons as a dual wielder, or you're going to be using ranged weapons, which use dexterity anyways.
Now, rangers do often find themselves in the thick of combat, and they need to be robust enough to stand up to challenging foes. For that reason, we also recommend putting a 15 in Constitution with your +1 bonus here. Third most important skill is going to be Wisdom, which we put a 14 in. But I do want to point out that there is an alternate build here where Wisdom is much more valuable. A lot of the Ranger's spells, unlike the Paladin spells, are going to be focused on actually making saving throws from your enemies. Paladins do a lot of buffing themselves and allies, where Rangers actually will be doing things that cause area of effects or causing debuffs on enemies. So you might want to shore up your Wisdom or take one of your ability score increases to raise your Wisdom up to make sure that your saving throw DC is good enough to challenge enemies with your saving throws.
There is an alternate way of building your character here for Ranger that if you really love the Ranger spellcasting, in particular, if you are planning on summoning animals or having an animal companion, there is a case to be made that you should grab the guide background or take that druidic warrior feature so that you can get druid cantrips, which is going to give you access to things like Starry Wisp, which is an attack cantrip, or things like Shillelagh. Shillelagh will let you use your Wisdom for melee attacks, although it does restrict you to basically blunt weapons. You're not going to be using this necessarily for dual wielding.
Could you dual wield clubs?
You can, but Shillelagh
you don't
only
get
applies to
right.
and you don't get the better dual wielding masteries if you do that. It's not bad, and it can work well for characters that are really going to invest in the Ranger spellcasting, but I personally would generally recommend, if you want to have good Ranger spellcasting, go with the Wisdom 16, and then consider boosting Wisdom down the line. You'll be a little less tougher, but it's still quite viable.
I do think, though, that for our standard build, if you're looking at backgrounds, you're going to look at Charlatan, Criminal, Guide, or Soldier. If you are looking at that Wisdom-based build, Guide still works, and Wayfarer also could give you Lucky.
Now, when we talk about species here, I think that obviously the classic archetype is the Elven Ranger.
Elven Ranger, although, we can't pass up Aragorn being a human ranger, and I, for one, love a halfling ranger.
Yeah, I also think, I have a strong affinity, I think it's from my days of playing World of Warcraft, for the Dwarven Ranger. There's something about the Dwarf Ranger, especially one that uses a firearm and then has a bear animal companion.
Okay.
I love, I like...
At first I was like, I don't know, dwarfs in nature, maybe like an underground, but no, as soon as you said the gun and the bear, then you're onto something.
Yeah, exactly. There's just something about that's going back to the original World of Warcraft cinematic, but that dwarf with a dwarf hunter with the bear animal companion has always had a special place in my heart, and I think it's a very iconic, it's like the Dwarven Woodsman.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is interesting because a lot of dwarves don't generally steer towards nature, but some of them might.
Or like the Dwarven Mountain Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
The Dwarven Mountain Man.
Yeah, with
their polar bear.
Or could you imagine a Goliath Ranger with a billy goat animal companion?
Or, okay, hear me out. A Goliath Ranger dressed like a lumberjack with a blue ogs.
Oh my god, that would be so good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That would be great.
So there's some fun.
There's some Americana references in there. You could be a Dragonborn Ranger with a draconic-esque reflavored animal companion. That could be cool.
I also do think that if you're going for maybe one of the subclasses like the Fey Wanderer, choosing something like the Azamar or the Tiefling, the Elf again fits in here, but something a little bit more magical. I do think that the Gnome also makes a great sort of animal companion sort of ranger.
It's worth noting that with the small-sized options, there is the possibility, because for the most part, ranger animal companions are medium-sized or smaller.
Yeah.
Same with summons. So by playing a halfling or a gnome or another small-sized species, the possibility now exists to ride your animal companion into battle, which can be a lot of fun.
We didn't talk about the orc, but I think if you imagine it as like an orc scout of like hunting parties and things like that.
There's the orc with the boar animal companion.
Yeah.
Yeah. that I find is kind of cool. So I think there's possibilities all around with,
as usual,
with the pairings.
What's
right?
your flavor?
Yeah.
And there's a way to imagine a ranger really in any society. It's like, are you that fringe society human, or are you somebody who grew up in the wilderness? Or there's a lot of options.
Yeah. As we get into weapon selection, if you're going the archer route, I would grab either the longbow for slow or the heavy crossbow for push. You could also go into the firearms here if your DM allows it, which are pretty sweet too. Although note that with the crossbows and firearms, the reloading is going to be a problem with extra attack. So you're going to need to take a feat to get around that once you get extra attack.
If you're going the dual wielder route, then you want to take the short sword and scimitar. You could also grab a dagger, and you might want a short bow just for backup while you're dual wielding so that you do have ranged attacks. Keep in mind that the ranger gives you a longbow, a short sword, and a scimitar right off the bat. So you're actually well equipped to jump into either of these right away.
Yeah, and I do think that it can be very viable for the archer to pick their favorite range weapon and then go with the scimitar and nick as your backup weapon, because then you can dual wield if you have to. Now, as we look at this in context with feats, because I think that the ranger is another place where your weapon selection, your feats, and your spells kind of all gel together, because there's more than just Hunter's Mark here. If you are going with the archer, you're going to want to grab the archery fighting style. You're going to want to get the sharpshooter feat. Or you might want to get crossbow expert if you're going to want to go with the heavy crossbow. And we'll talk about why you might want to go the crossbow route for the archer in a moment.
If you are going the dual wielder route, then your fighting style is going to be 2-weapon fighting, and your feats are going to be dual wielder and defensive duelist. With the dual wielder feat, the extra attack feature, and the nick weapon mastery, you can make 4 attacks per turn while dual wielding with a ranger, because the nick feature lets you take your bonus action attack and make it part of the same action, and you can still use your bonus action to attack again.
Thanks to the dual wielder feats. Wording.
So combining all of these together makes a really potent use of your Hunter's Mark.
Yes, because what you'll do with the dual wielder build is you will cast Hunter's Mark on the first round and make 3 attacks. And then on subsequent turns, you'll use the dual wielder bonus action attack and attack 4 times. So what that is kind of the opening move there. A lot of people go, well, there's a traffic jam of what to use your bonus action with, and that's kind of the way to do it. However, if you do think the target is going to not survive for more than 2 rounds, it might just be worth just all out attacking them with all of your attacks and not worrying about Hunter's Mark in this case. And that's part of the reason why you don't necessarily always want to rely on Hunter's Mark as your spell, because as we get into the spell options for the dual wielder in particular, the dual wielder likes using some of the other spells that don't rely on their bonus action to get extra damage on the field, right? On the other hand, the archer, part of the reason why the archer really likes going the crossbow route is not only you get a bigger damage die with the heavy crossbow, the crossbow's push weapon mastery is going to give you some cool tricks that you can apply with your spells. The other feats that you might want to take on your ranger include Skulker and Speedy. These are going to be great for boosting your dexterity, making you even faster, because remember, you get a speed boost too as a ranger, so you can get your speed up to 50 feet if you take Speedy. Skulker is going to really boost your stealth.
Yeah. So now you can be sneaky, fast, but you may also want to consider Fey Touched and Shadow Touch just for some additional spell casting for the ranger. Getting Misty Step is never a bad idea, or Invisibility.
They're good ways to boost your wisdom as well. Another option to boost your wisdom and boost your spellcasting is actually taking Warcaster with the ranger. So it's not a bad idea to go, if you are boosting your wisdom up later on. You can kind of start off with one way of approaching this with the ranger is you can go with your damage boosting feat. So you can grab either crossbow expert, dual wielder, or sharpshooter. That brings your dex to 18. And then you get +2 dex on top of that. So now you're at 20 dexterity, and you spend your other 2 feats taking Fey Touched and Warcaster, or Shadow Touch to Warcaster. And if you went the Dex Wiz build, that'll give you Dex 20, Wisdom 18, which is going to put you in a pretty strong space. Another way to approach that, if you're not so worried about boosting up your spellcasting, is to just go with Dual Wielder or Crossbow Expert, Skulker, and Speedy. Again, the Ranger's in that situation where there's more feats that you want to take than you can take.
Yeah. As we come to the spells, again, Rangers have a lot going on. There's feats that you want, there's spells that you need, there's all these features. What spells are going to work best for the Ranger? We think that no matter what build you're using, it's basically the same best spell list for any type of Ranger that you're playing. For first level spells, we think that either Entangle or Ensnaring Strike. You don't need both, but we think that having one of these is going to be pretty valuable. Both tie up your enemies.
Hail of Florence is a good just way to get some extra damage out of a bonus action, which you can use alongside Hunter's Mark on subsequent turns. And you get a ton of utility out of Good Berry and Speak with Animals.
At second level, you're going to want to grab Aid, probably Enhance Ability as well. Although one of my personal favorites is Pass Without Trace. If you are going the stealthy route, Pass Without Trace adds a blanket plus 10 to you and your party's stealth checks. This solves the problem of if you have a heavy armored paladin or fighter in your party who sucks at stealth, adding a blanket plus 10 can really save the day.
Now, another solid gold spell here at second level is Spike Growth. It creates a field of difficult terrain that does damage to enemies for every 5 feet they pass through it, 2d4 for every 5 feet. Spike Growth is the big spell that we like combining with the push weapon mastery, which is the reason to go with the heavy crossbow and take Crossbow Expert. Because with your Spike Growth up, you can pull out your heavy crossbow, nail someone with the crossbow bolt, send them flying back 10 feet, which is actually going to cause, if they are going through the Spike Growth, 4d4 extra damage. And if you've got extra attack, you can push them through it twice. So you can get a lot of extra damage out of Spike Growth, especially if you've got other party members that have forced movement effects. Spike Growth is kind of the core of what we like to call the cheese grater strategy. And so playing with that is a pathway to an amount of damage that some would consider game breaking, but it's a lot of fun to just grind your enemies up using spikes.
I'm now picturing the dwarf with a heavy crossbow who sings jagged rocks out of the ground and shoots the enemy across them.
That's cool.
You might also want to consider Summon Beast, which is a second level spell that lets you get an animal companion, regardless of whether you are playing the subclass that gives you an animal companion, or you can just have more than one animal companion.
So the key thing with Summon Beast is that you can command the beast to attack without having to use your bonus action or action. And this is why dual wielders in particular, those who are taking the dual wielder feat, love Summon Beast, because you're getting extra damage, you're getting an extra body on the board, and it requires no management on your part, unlike Hunter's Mark. So for a dual wielder, I strongly recommend the summon spells like Summon Beast, because once the summon is out and you can summon it, and again, because of the duration of these spells, they're easy to summon prior to combat starting. You get the beast out, it's just going to do its own thing, requiring no input from you, and you're going to be able to use all of your actions and bonus actions to fight alongside it, essentially.
At third level, Conjure Animals is a great choice here, as well as Conjure Barrage. We're doing a lot of conjuring. Conjure Barrage, I think, is a pretty fun spell. You may also want to consider taking Revivify if nobody else in your party has. It's always good to have one person with Revivify. It's a great problem-solving spell for death. And lastly, Summon Fae, which is kind of the upgraded version of Summon Beast. Now we're summoning something more powerful, and I think Summon Fae is one of the great summon spells out there.
If you come to fourth level spells, you can also upgrade to Summon Elemental, or you can go for Conjure Woodland Beings. Conjure Woodland Beings is really great because it creates an aura around you that deals damage to your enemies. So again, this is another concentration spell that for the melee-based rangers, this is just putting more damage on the field that requires no management from you, so you're able to continue using your bonus action and action to making your whirlwind of attacks, while the flitting woodland spirits also damage your enemies at the same time.
And at 5th level, we are conjuring more options with Conjure Volley, and one of my favorite options is Steelwind Strike, which I always picture as that sort of anime moment where the swordsman disappears and goes shh, and then
Nothing
5 people fall over dead. Steelwind Strike is just such a fun spell. Swift Quiver is also a great option. I would say Steelwind Strike for the dual wielder and Swift Quiver for the archer.
So let's dive into the ranger subclasses now. The Beastmaster is an awesome subclass for having the animal companion all the time. And as we already spoke our praises of Summon Beast and Summon Fae, the cool thing is that you can have the primal companion with the Beastmaster and the summon out. So you could really feel like you are the pack master by summoning animals and having a primal companion.
If you want, you can even use Conjure Woodland Beings to imagine a swarm of your chosen animal attacking enemies around you.
It's important to note with the Beastmaster that many of your beast's attacks stats are based on your wisdom. So this is another place where if you're going to go with the Beastmaster, I would go with the 16 wisdom build. And the thing to be aware of when you're playing one is that you have to use your bonus action to command your beast to attack. So this is going to mean that the Beastmaster has to do a little bit of setup with using Hunter's Mark. And it also, I think, really incentivizes the Beastmaster more towards an archer who has less ways of just weaponizing their bonus action than the dual wielder does. So if you want to go with the classic archer build, I would go with the Beastmaster. I would gravitate towards the summoning and the conjuring spells, or spike growth, is another reason why. It's great to have a flying beast, the beast of the sky, and spike growth and the heavy crossbow, because then you're shooting them into the field with spikes while your hawk is clawing their eyes out. Yeah.
Now I'm picturing the dwarf with the heavy crossbow, the hawk on his shoulder. Great. Next up, we have the Fey Wanderer. The Fey Wanderer gets to add extra psychic damage to their attacks. They get extra spells known, including Misty Step and Charm Person and Summon Fey, which means that they're a little bit more maneuverable. I love having Misty Step on here. They feel a little bit more magical, and I love that sort of angle for the Ranger. With the Fey Wanderer, similar to the Beastmaster, you might actually want a decent wisdom score because you actually get to add your wisdom mod to your charisma checks, which makes the Fey Wanderer capable of being the face of the party as a Ranger, but only if you have a decent wisdom.
And as well, the Fey Wanderer's other class features really make them good with wanting to do more spellcasting. One of their coolest features, though, for me, is that they actually get the ability to cast Summon Fey without concentrating on Summon Fey. So the Fey Wanderer, in a weird way, is also a bit of a summoner / animal companion, but this is more of a higher level feature where they always get to have that summon out. So you can actually have the summon going and Hunter's Mark going at the same time, which is a great damage dealing combo, especially, and it works regardless of whether you're going to be a dual wielder or an archer.
Next up, we have the Gloom Stalker. This is the Ranger that sticks to the shadows and assassinates their foes with precision. They gain the ability to have extra speed and do extra damage on an attack once per turn. They get additional spells as well. They can disguise the self. They get fear, greater invisibility, and when they are in darkness, they become invisible to creatures that rely on dark vision to see them.
This is huge. It is difficult to overstate how powerful this feature is, because if you're adventuring in darkness at nighttime or in dark dungeons or in the Underdark, where, especially if your entire party has dark vision already or doesn't need to bring torches, you're basically always invisible.
I won't lie, I ran an Underdark campaign and was shocked nobody chose to play Gloomstalker. It seemed like the obvious choice because they'd basically be invisible forever. And in our own campaign, we have a Gloomstalker Ranger who we have done infiltrations at night and she sticks to the rooftops and nobody can see her.
Yep. Yeah. Gloomstalkers work great with archers because the stealth just goes to the next level. It's really cool to take the Skulker feat on the Gloomstalker, because you're just, no one will know you were there. The Gloomstalker with Skulker and the archer build is like the Skyrim / Oblivion stealth archer, where like you're 10 feet in front of somebody, but it's dark and you're shooting them and they're like, must have been the wind.
With like an arrow sticking out of them. Must have been my imagination.
Yeah.
Like, I love that.
Yeah. Like if you like the kind of Elder Scrolls style stealth archer that could just never be seen, this is the archetype for you.
Lastly, we come to the Hunter. We heard you like Rangers, so we put Ranger on your Ranger. If you want to fully lean into the classic archetype of the Ranger, the Hunter is the way to go. You get benefits to your Hunter's mark, so you can learn a creature's immunities, resistances, and vulnerabilities, really bringing into play with the Hunter the fact that once you've chosen the target that you're hunting, you can learn about it, you can track it, you can follow it, and you can kill it. You also get to choose a few options with the Hunter as you level up, and you can change these options each day. So depending on the type of hunt you're going on, you might choose options that better benefit your Ranger for the type of monsters that you're going up against.
My favorite feature of them is their Colossus Slayer ability, which just does extra damage to enemies that are already wounded. Which is probably one of the strongest damage boost abilities across all the Ranger subclasses, because it's once per turn, but it's always on, and like your first attack damages the target, your second attack benefits from Colossus Slayer, so it sets itself up.
And if somebody else goes before you in initiative, just attack who they attacked, and you're starting off with a bang, already having extra damage.
So as we look at ways to role play the Ranger, I think one of the first questions that I like to ask with a Ranger is, are you the person that grew up in the wilderness? Or are you an explorer who has learned how to survive within it? Because I think that the Ranger embodies this sort of archetype that can lean either on the person that walks the edge between civilization and the wilderness, right? And so you might be kind of fully on one side of that equation or the other, because a lot of the times you'll think of like the classic elf ranger who exists in harmony with nature and is someone that protects nature. But then you can also imagine things like the dwarves, where like the dwarves are more about surviving because they come from a more city and urban based society, perhaps. And so their relationship with nature is more about being rugged survivalists that are finding ways to survive in that environment, because that's not the environment that they're most comfortable in anyways.
I mean, you could also be somebody who lives in a smaller village or town, and you are the town's hunter and gatherer, and you go out hunting in the woods. So you live in a community, but by default, you had to learn the ways of the wilds in order to hunt and track your prey for survival. I think that there's a lot of ways that it doesn't need to be, I was born and raised by wolves. I was born in the wilderness, raised by wolves, and now I'm a lone wolf. You can imagine your Ranger in so many different ways, of a person who just had to learn to survive, or a person who was sent into the wilds. I even think of a lot of military people who are trained. It's not like they grew up in the wilderness, but they are trained to deal with environments that they have to survive in.
Exactly. Like that's where you can look at things like militaries, communities, cities, nations, organizations, always kind of, especially when you're drawing inspiration from like the classic explorers, right? And there's different ways that you can go about this. Like oftentimes, you could be that Ranger that is much more about like exploiting the wilderness and actually doesn't care. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can imagine, it's not a popular archetype, certainly, but you can imagine that character that is more about like, no, I am the hunter. I am the big game hunter. Here I go out on the hunt. I'm not here to exist in harmony with nature. I am here to tame it. I am here to conquer the wilderness. And that's a very different character than the person who wants to exist in harmony and was like raised by wolves.
You could literally take Craven the Hunter and just be like, I gotta find something that can match how badass I am, and, go fight Spider-Man, because that makes sense. And given all of this, how do you feel about civilization? How does your Ranger feel about civilized places? Perhaps they've spent so much time in the wilderness that it's hard going back. Perhaps, again, if they were born and raised in the wilderness, they might not even like civilized spaces. One of my favorite movies of all time, Princess Mononoke, really deals with this human raised by wolves who then has to fend off the city that is all manufacturing weapons and guns and all of that, and their impact on the environment. And it really has those sort of messages in it. So Princess Mononoke is a great archetype, but you could have also just been somebody who, again, went on a military excursion and has been gone for long enough that now coming back, it's like you don't know how to settle back in to a quiet life. You need to be out there in the wilds. There's a lot of options. Or maybe you like the quiet life, but you know that your skills can help. And so you go out there, even though you don't love sleeping in a tent, but you do it because you're the best at it.
Yeah, and then there's always the question of, like, are you part of an organization such as a hunter's lodge or a scout regiment or a military? Another great example that you can think of for role-playing rangers is Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. And Aloy often joins, like, the hunters organizations that they go out on hunts, they bring back trophies. They kind of have, like, that competition and hierarchy between them. And this could be a cool way of, like, creating a rival or a friend. Like, maybe you have another person who, like, you've traveled all sorts of places and your ranger is like, oh yeah, I know the elf that lives in this forest. We're best friends. And, like, every time I come, I always make sure to bring, like, their favorite tea and some fruits from the latest environment that I explored. Or maybe I'm going to this lodge and I'm going to show up there. And if I don't have a trophy to show off, the other rangers are going to make fun of me.
Yeah. Rangers are tied to nature in a lot of ways and tied to animals. So are there any animals or parts of nature that you strongly identify with? I always like to think, especially if I'm playing the Beastmaster, there's the obvious choices like a bear, a wolf, a hawk. But you can go kind of crazy with this and really mold your ranger in a very unique way based on the animal that you have as a companion. I once imagined a gnome that had a giant frog companion, and they lived in a swamp together. And so that already tells a very different story than the dwarf with the hawk or the big barbarian with the bear. Or maybe there's a part of nature. Maybe it's the destructive forces of nature that you identify with, or maybe it is the calm harmony of nature. There's a lot that happens in nature, and which part speaks to you?
With a ranger, it could also always be tempting to be a bit of a lone wolf character, and that can be rewarding as an archetype. But remember that in many stories and in many cases where we have an iconic lone wolf character, often the journey the lone wolf character goes on in the story is about learning that the lone wolf dies alone, but the pack survives and thrives. So if you do imagine your character as a bit of a lone wolf at the start of the campaign, or maybe someone that only gets along with animals, that can be a great starting point for your character, but you might want to explore how would your character realize that they need something from other people, or that that mantra, again, the lone wolf dies alone, and the pack survives. So that's kind of an interesting tension to explore with the character if you want to play the lone wolf archetype. Remember, the point is learning not to be a lone wolf anymore, often in many stories, right?
Also, they are half-casters, so how did you gain your skills and your magic? Do you have any connection to druids or fey creatures, or are your magical abilities a matter of practical know-how? I love this idea that you could imagine most ranger spells as clever contraptions or uses of natural environments. Perhaps spike growth is actually a little bomb that you made that lays out a bunch of thorns on the ground. Perhaps you have like a miracle grow in your pocket. I don't know. There are ways to imagine this that are less magical and more just a survivor who has a robust toolkit of options that have semi-magical effects. So I think the ranger really actually leans into that you don't have to imagine this as, having a staff or a wand or twiddling your fingers and magic happens. You can really describe your magic in unique ways that speak to how you depict your ranger.
With your ranger, also, do you have a great story of when you survived it against all odds, or of your greatest hunt that you ever went on?
How do you track and mark your prey? This is a really good role-playing opportunity. When you're hunting monsters, what does that look like for you?
How did you meet your adventuring companions? Maybe on a hunt. And do you have any fears, flaws, vices, or dark secrets? Again, the lone wolf angle. Why do you keep to yourself? What is the secret? What is the hunt that went wrong, or the time that you lost someone that was close to you? Or maybe you have that flaw where you can't resist the temptations of civilization. And so when you are in a civilized environment, the fact that there's food everywhere, right? You just gorge yourself.
You've been eating nothing but good berries for months.
Yeah. And maybe you revel in all the vices and temptations of civilization, all the food, all the booze, all the meat, if you will. You can't resist that. So that's another interesting way to play with the civilization and wilderness tension of the ranger.
We hope that these tips and ideas have given you a foundation to build some really amazing rangers out of. If you're excited to play a ranger, we want to hear about your character in the comments below.
The videos that we make on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you found this class guide useful and it helped make your next character, please consider becoming a patron of the show. It really helps us to continue creating more video content like this here on YouTube. The links to our Patreon are down below.
And if you want to see how awesome a ranger can be, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings right here on YouTube. All the previous episodes are right up over here.
And we've got plenty more class guides for the other classes in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time
In the dungeon.